Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of the InPower Hour with Susan Dintino. And before I go any further, I want to tell you that you can watch this magic happening, or whatever it is, over on Facebook Live. So take a look over at my Facebook fan page, and you will see me live. You'll see me in this wonderful studio. And I am so privileged today to have with me Abby Moneyhun. She's actually co-founded several million-dollar businesses, so I got to find out about those. Her leadership skills and ability to merge numerology with the galactic code is something we're going to be talking about, as well as what she was doing on 9/11. So I'm bringing her on, and you can see her on Facebook Live as well. Hello, Abby. Welcome to the InPower Hour.
Hi. It's great to see you too, Susan, and especially face to face.
I know. This has been so wonderful that we've had this opportunity to meet in person.
Which Susan was able to come over to do this live event here at the High Vibe TV studio. So we barely met. Was it yesterday? I can't even remember the days now. 2 days ago?
Yes, well,
face to face.
Exactly, and I'm always time zone challenged, so I never know quite what day it is once I leave the area. My kids tell this joke about how I flew from Buffalo to JFK Airport, and when the cab driver picked me up with my daughter, I was telling him I was jet lagged, and she goes, "Mom, you came from Buffalo, so really, let's..." But, you know, before we go into our topic, I want to make sure that I mention that our hearts go out to the people that are facing Hurricane Florence. I know I've been there. Last year we were biting our nails with Hurricane Irma. So we are going to call in all of our spirit guides, all of our angels to push Florence away. And so very few people are impacted. So I just want everybody to know that our prayers and good wishes are with them for that. So want to begin the show, and what a day to be talking about a hurricane, the anniversary of 9/11. So we've got a bunch of things we're going to be talking about. We're also going to be taking your calls. I'm going to move on over to my chat room, which is the InPower Hour with Susan Dintino. Come on over there and ask your questions. And I'm going to turn this over to Abby, a bit about who she is and what she does.
That's a really big question. You know how it is when it's like you don't really know how to describe yourself, like in a nutshell. I was writing my bio, and it was like I'm really multifaceted, and I never know which facet to concentrate on, you know, because I have been the majority of my life such a businesswoman who then, you know, kind of went off and away from that world and kind of went into the energy of my own body. It's interesting because my first business, not my first business ever, but my big main businesses in life were all surrounding oil and gas and the production of that equipment. And because we ended up creating like a manufacturing facility for equipment that my ex-husband actually invented. It was equipment that removed all the emissions from the gas dehydration process, and then also from like the storage of oil. And it just evolved into this huge conglomerate business of research and development that was all surrounding energy. And so when he and I split our ways in our marriage, you know, we continued to work in the business together, but then I was allowed the opportunity to go more into the energy of who I was as a human. And from there it became really abundantly clear that a lot of us humans have the same emotions and feelings, and a lot of times we feel like we're going through those things alone. And that's what created the whole idea behind where we are now with High Vibe TV, because I had reached out to, it was actually David Palmer, who was the Leo King. He had a app already created, and I knew that he knew how to make a media wheel work. And so from there we created High Vibe TV, and that's where the focus is right now, is creating this app. The app has already been live, but we haven't loaded all the content in it yet. But we're at that point where we're creating content for people that are going through tremendous ordeals in their life, to let them know that there is not only hope, but there is such a brighter side that's available when we actually do the work. to bust through the walls and any instability that we feel in our life, just to let it like carry us into the next phase of our life. And so that's like in a nutshell how I personally have evolved.
I think it's so interesting because you were working with a very traditional energy source,
Right.
and then you started looking into the more inherent qualities of energy. Well, we are going to have quite a bit to discuss with Abby, but I want to talk about the card that I pulled for everybody, which I do each and every week, and now I'll actually get to show you. For those of you that are tuning in, you're in the chat room. It's always posted in the chat room, and I do this because I do mini readings throughout the show. A show like today, we've got a lot to cover, so I'm not sure how many readings I'm going to get to. But as always, this card is so appropriate for everything that we're talking about. And the card that I pulled is the Page of Ariel. Now, Archangel Ariel is all about the environment. I always think of her as being very, very connected to the fairy kingdom. So whenever Ariel shows up, I always want to remind everybody the importance of playing. And as Abby was talking about hope with all of the challenges that we have, how important it is that we realize that, we're here for such a short amount of time that even when we're facing obstacles that seem insurmountable, it's so important that we find joy in the little things and just able to keep going. And I know, like I said, with these horrific environmental things going on, then it can be a bit of a challenge. But for all of us that are sending the positive energy, that's why I love the name of this, High Vibes, because I always hear that Beach Boy song play, Good Vibrations, whenever I hear it. But it is so much about the high vibrations. And what this card is saying is that an excellent opportunity will be offered to you, scholarships or the potential of collaboration, time to get to work. Just like Abby was saying, so many times when we're on this metaphysical path, we kind of feel like, okay, it's somebody or something's going to come knocking at our door, pull us out, and just say, hey, guess what? You're enlightened. And, it's not about work. And I think depending on why we're here, and as you notice, I'm talking with my hands, and believe me, I do this even when I'm not on camera. But when you're really getting involved with meditation or yoga or any of the things that you're doing, it's a practice. It's all something that is work, but in the most sacred way. So on a day like today, when we've got so many memories of where we were and what we're doing, thinking about a spiritual side and the fact that everything does happen for a reason, I just think is so significant. So speaking about 9/11, Abby, where were you?
I was home, and I was getting my very young sons out the door to go to school for the day. And it was one of those things when it happened, it was like, I remember sitting there because we were going to get the boys off to school and then head to work, and we just stopped everything. And a bunch of the guys from work ended up coming up to our house, and we just sat there and watched the TV together because we didn't know what was going to end up happening that day. And I just remember, it's one of those things where you see it and you don't really know if it's real. You don't know what the real intent is. But I've got to tell you something that I noticed watching that day, is that when we're in a place of suffering, that's usually the time that people pray. And I could feel that even though there was that much pain that was happening in that city, there was a unification that was taking place in humanity of pouring out. There was a lot of fear, but there was also a lot of love, because it was just like this rush of energetic, force that was going to be with the people that had gone through that. It was a very surreal day where everything just stopped, like for a moment. It was one of those dots in time where it's like, boom, it's like a place marker, of an energetic exchange that day.
Yeah, I know we were driving home from Florida, and I believe we were bringing a car back. I can't remember why we were driving, and it was my husband and I. And we used to love to stop at Cracker Barrels. And I would usually go do all the little shopping, and then we'd have our breakfast. And we were there, and a woman started talking about what was going on. And my husband had gone to the bathroom, and he came back, and I said, they're saying something about the World Trade Centers being, falling down. He goes, that's impossible. That can't possibly be happening. And then, we realized it. And my daughter at the time was living in New Jersey, and she would take the subway that ended in the World Trade Center. So then I was going crazy trying to get a hold of her, and thankfully she was fine. But I think I want to say that it's Greg Braden. I remember I heard a lecture about that incident, and right after to speak about what you're talking about. In some way, they can measure this, like heart math, they call it, the vibration of the planet, and how after that, with so many people coming together in a positive way worldwide, that the heart of the planet, the vibration, they were able to measure that it had increased in a very positive way. So
What's interesting to me is when something like that happens, it really makes you look at your life. And you see in a moment, like, what is really important? Is it really the car that's in your garage? Is it the ring that you're wearing? Is it that desired designer dress or the purse or the, even like the plastic surgery that you wanted to get to fix something on a body? Because in that moment, it's like, what's real? And if we can even, like go back into that point in time, it's like, really, what's real in that moment is the people that you love, and who do you want to be around? Who do you want to hold, or whose energy do you want to feel? And I think that what's interesting is how quickly humans forget that, and then just get back into their daily life and right back into the rut or the grind,
Yes, exactly. And I was just looking to see if we have any phone calls. We'll have to find out if anybody's calling in. I would love for our listeners to let me know either in the chat or via phone call what your experience was. And I think it's in one of my favorite movies, Love Actually, where they talk about how nobody making phone calls on those planes were making any calls except those of love, that it was just so much about this outpouring, for those poor people. I always think of the terror, and yet, in those, I think many of the people were using the phones off the plane because it was before cell phones, and they were calling to let their loved ones know that they loved them. And it is, I think that's what this really reminds you of, is that love is really the most important thing. And as much as our lives have changed, I think that unification of coming together like that is really significant when we did all come together in that place of love. So, and I think having young children, that had to be, see, mine were all older by that point. My youngest, as I said, was living in New York. How did you explain everything to your sons?
What was interesting is they'd already gone to school, and they had seen it at school too. And I remember the boys, where it was just like they one of the things was like seeing people jump out of the building, or, like the fear that was going on. And it was like, at any given moment, we don't know what is going to happen in our life, and I told them the example of, like myself, one day me and my mom, we were riding down the road, and the car just rolled. All of a sudden, we were rolling down a cliff. And from that moment forward, there was a trajectory of change. But what I learned from that is that in any moment it can change. And that's why we have to focus on every single moment that we do have and just enjoy that moment. And not focus on what happened in the past or what could happen in the future. And a lot of that was from, like later on, reading Eckhart Tolle and Power of Now. That was the message. But I think that's that Akashic knowledge that we all behold within ourselves, where it's like the only thing that really is important is in that moment how we're going to deal with it. You know, for even the people that were losing family members that were there, you know, like I had a girlfriend who, her father worked in the building. Her mother and father were going through a divorce. And her mother just happened to be at the building that day to sign their papers. And so they both passed together. And so for this woman, she was just like, what is the likelihood of that? And for her, it made her feel like there could have been some sort of serendipity that could have been, maybe that was just what was supposed to happen. You know, like maybe they were supposed to just go together, and it helped her to have like this a sense of healing feeling that they had been able to pass together, you know, even in their, you know, like the discord of the divorce. But I know that's not the question that you asked me, but I just thought, I mean, that's just remembering what did happen. It's interesting to go back to the thought processes.
Yes, they lost us. That's why I was, okay. Are we back now? Okay. I don't know if you've got messages coming in or something.
Can you help with this?
Because there's some dinging going in.
They lost us, apparently. And they've got music playing.
I think we're back now.
He says we're good on our end, so we have no reason, and the internet's good, so I don't know. Whatever messages are coming in or notifications on here, we need to turn them off. Start on the very top right. On the top right? Yeah. Did you get it, Braxton?
Yeah, I think he got it.
Got it.
Okay, if we have
Where
any
did you drop us? Where did you drop us off at? So you have no idea what we were saying. We're ready.
Well, just like on live TV, on live radio, you could have things happen. So I apologize that we lost you for a minute when Abby was sharing a beautiful story with us about everything that she really realized after that event, and also about a bit of an accident. And I guess that was quite an accident, to be rolling down a hill and having that had to be something.
For my own life? Yeah,
Yes.
it was crazy. It was actually like one of the most amazing things I could have gone through at a young age for teaching a lesson. At the time, it didn't feel like that. At the time, it felt like the most horrifying thing, because it did put me in a back brace for about a year and a half and a lot of physical therapy. But it was really interesting. I don't even know if you want to go this direction, but it's very interesting to me, because the week before that, I had been offered a modeling contract for mascara. And my parents had said no. You know, and I was young. I was 17 years old. So it was like, no, you're not going to do that. And I was ticked off, you know, because I could see like this whole entire beautiful future unfolding, you know. And so when we wrecked, as we were rolling down this hill and it was in the snow, I felt all the stuff hitting my face, and I thought it was blood. I mean, I just because, anyway, I won't even go into all that. But the problem was, when we got down to the bottom of the hill, when I folded down the visor to be able to see what I looked like, because I could feel my face was just, I mean, it was wet. And the mirror shattered out, and I couldn't see anything. The car was on its side. Air was going out of the tires. I thought the car was going to blow, because in movies, the car rolls and then it just explodes. And I looked up, and my mom's head was just like kind of hanging there. She had fainted. And anyway, the very long story short of that was, I sat there telling myself, I have my personality. I have my personality. I knew that my entire face had been obliterated. My hands were full of blood. I had glass all over everything in my body that I could see. And it was like I knew that I still had my interior self because I could hear it talking. And I remember everything just got really quiet. And it was like, I got to meet me, like in that physical body, because it was like, even without that exterior shell or the look of it or not knowing what was there, I still had myself. And I remember getting into the hospital. They wouldn't let me see a mirror or anything. And I did. I had a lot of glass down the side of my face. But there was something about that took away like any need to look a certain way, because it, for those brief moments, because it was like I had me. And I knew from that day forward, every single moment was a gift, because it could have so easily been gone that in an instant. We were just going down the road and we were going to my grandma's house, and it was like in an instant, the whole trajectory of life changed. And because of that trajectory, it made me a deeper human. Like maybe it took away some of it really didn't mess up my face at all. It was like there was nothing there, but it was just the idealization or the knowing that at any moment we may not have our physical function. And so to appreciate that body every single day and every single moment, and to not be harsh on it, and to talk tenderly to ourselves, to be really focused on the important things, rather than, like all these external things, so it was a huge, huge lesson to learn. Huge.
What I'm finding interesting this time around as they're talking about 9/11 is they are focusing on the night before, and how everybody went to bed and everybody went about what they were doing and then got up in the morning, and how exactly what you're saying, in the wink of an eye, things were changed. And I know I've talked about it on the show before, that my daughter was 8 months pregnant, and I was actually in town for her baby shower. She wasn't feeling good. She went to the doctors, and long story short, she had lost the baby. The baby had passed intrauterинely. So we went to the hospital to deliver the baby, and while they're doing that process, they began drawing blood. She wasn't clotting. So long story short, they realized she had AML leukemia, and they didn't expect her to survive, right? And I can remember, first, very honestly, I almost fainted with this great news, but I can remember feeling like, oh my gosh, everything is different now. Everything has changed. This isn't something that always happens to somebody else. This is something that is happening to me. And I talk all the time about the power being in the present moment. But when you're really faced with that present moment and looking at everything in a different way than you've ever looked at it before, talk about praying. When you talk about being kind to yourself and the self-talk, that I started learning immediately, because so many people in the medical field, they come up with this whole idea that she's very sick, she's very sick. It got to a point I wouldn't let some of the doctors in a room. I had affirmations all over the room because I didn't want to, really focus on that. And I talk again a lot about this on the show, how important our self-talk is, how important what we say to others is, even when we're praying for somebody. That, like with this whole Florence thing, what we want to do is visualize everything being okay, not falling into that lower vibration of panic or worry. We want to start visualizing somehow this thing being less intense, somehow this thing falling apart. That's the way you pray. And when somebody's ill, you do affirmative prayer where you see them as healthy, because in truth they are. Because as you're saying, we are not our physical bodies.
Well, and the other realization I had was that when we are when you're in a situation, I don't care how traumatic it is, the person that's actually going through the experience is encoded with a system inside the body to deal with it. So like for in the example of my mom and I'm going to tell you this just for the example of you and your daughter. My mom was not hurt as bad as I was, but my body kicked into gear. It went into shock. There was an adrenaline rush. There was every single thing that my body needed to be able to handle in that moment. From my mom looking at it, she was feeling it the way that her mind was allowing her to feel it. So I almost feel like she went through a harder time than I did, trying to visualize everything or feeling the pain of it. Does that make sense? Where you're like, so for you and your daughter, just something to think about, or for people that were in the, you know, in the building at 9/11, they knew what they had to do in a moment. The people that were on the plane were encoded to go into action, and they did what they needed to do in that moment. For us looking at it, we go through a horrifying experience in our head trying to feel what they felt. And I think it's really important for each one of us to know that we are encoded that way, so that we don't worry about how we would react, to know that in an instant that anything does happen, that we will know what to do and how to react. And if we keep that knowing, it helps us to be more peaceful inside our own body, to feel more comfortable with experiences that have happened, to know that we don't have to put ourselves into a place of pain to feel what the other person went through, but to feel how we feel when we're going through those experiences, and to be more compassionate with ourselves for the feelings that we feel as we're watching other people's emotions and feelings. And what that does is it helps us to be inside our own body and have our experience while our loved ones and other people that we know are having their experience in their own physical bodies.
And when you talk about this coding, is this part of this galactic code? Now, what coding are you talking about, or just something you believe
it's
inherent?
It's just an inherent belief that I have, or that just comes out. It's not even something that I know for me. It's just that when I open up my own conduit and where I open up my own vessel to communicate, that's what comes through. And so in galactic code, every one of us are encoded with a specific purpose. And when I do the galactic code readings, which is something that I didn't even talk about like in the intro, but what I do is I usually merge numerology with galactic code, and you can see what each person's going to have a propensity to feel or a propensity to deal with, which it could be a health issue, or it could be, all the various things that could come up. But that coding is, what I mean is that if we have a human body on this planet, we're walking around on this planet in a human body that's got a computer, right? And I don't know where I'm hearing there's some feedback coming. Is it from your, maybe your, there's like volume coming through.
Yeah.
Okay. So when our physical body is put on this planet, there's a computer in our brain that's running this body. So it only makes sense that it would be capable of handling anything that were to come up in a moment.
Yeah. When I look back at those hours, I don't know how I got through it. You look back at it, but you're right. You go into like an autopilot kind of thing. What I was trying to do was look at some of your comments in the Facebook Live, but I can't do that because it will create havoc with our sound here. So I do appreciate those of you that are tuning in. Just a reminder, this is Susan Dintino. We are doing the InPower Hour live on inflowradio.com. My special guest is Abby Moneyhun.
Moneyhun. Like I need some money.
I don't know why I always want to put the other word first. Maybe it was after reading about your $1 million businesses. But anyways, and let's make sure that we mention your show when it's on, and also on Inflow Radio. That was the privilege of meeting Abby. She's one of my colleagues here. So
yeah, I'm on Inflow Radio at 1 p.m. Mountain Time on Wednesdays. And so It has been really interesting doing the live shows on there. When I've been traveling a lot, it's been harder to do live shows for that station, but they still play at 1 p.m. Mountain Time.
Okay, so you do pre-records then.
I do pre-records if I can't go live.
And so you have a website, which is your name. So why don't you spell that for the audience?
It's ABBY, Abby Money, HUN.com. AbbyMoneyhun.com.
That's just such a great name.
Yeah, it was my ex-husband's name, and I kept it because I loved it, and it was a great gift that he gave me, and it was the name of our companies as well, the Moneyhun companies.
Oh, wow. So as far as your businesses go, and I'm assuming you're no longer involved, or are you actively involved
No,
in
I'm
the
not real
business?
actively involved, but I'm very much, I know what's going on in them.
Okay. What nationality is that last
It's
name?
Irish.
Irish.
Yeah, like Monaghan.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's very interesting.
Or Monaghan.
So let's get back here, because I think now I don't remember what I saw somewhere statistically how many people don't even really remember anything about 2001 and what happened. And so now there's all these things on TV, like you said about your sons watching and seeing the jumping and things like that. Did you notice like your children having any after effects or after this experience? I mean, fear-based more?
They would talk about it, but I think the reason they didn't, they were like 7 and 5. So it was like they were protected in a sense, they would hear other people talking. But I also think it was because of the, like the conversations that we had. Do you know people that were affected traumatically, like with PA or, post-traumatic
Really,
stress?
I have to say, I did not know anybody personally that was involved at all. So I'm trying to remember the name of the book that I read that was based on a boy that had lost a child, and his father. And it was a really famous book, and it really went into it. His father was actually, again, it was fiction, but his father was the one that had jumped, and they had taken many pictures of that. By the time I started watching it, they had removed those because we were traveling. But I really didn't know anybody personally. And again, my children were all older at the time, so it was dealing with it from a different vantage point. But I think it's, for young children, I would imagine that had to be a turning point.
Yeah. I think it's really important for us to remember now, looking back, that we really don't know what happened. Nobody really knows all the events of it. But what we do know is how our bodies reacted to it. And it is important to remember that it's for those of us that weren't there, there's a lot of mental picture regarding it that can be dealt with. Or basically we can change the outlook. So it's like, instead of looking at the traumas of what happened, we have to focus on, like, what was the benefit of the sacrifices that were made, if they were even sacrifices. It's like we saw so many pictures, of like these stairways, that were going to heaven, or it really prompted a lot of, what is our true belief? What do we really think happens after death even? And if it's true that it really is just energies, that are walking around in physical form, it's like, were the energies really gone? Or did they just transform? And that's why I think it's important to not get stuck in the trauma of the event, because it's easy to go back into that mental state of fear when we focus on the trauma.
I think that's true. And I remember, again, my husband, when we were driving, and he said, well, we're going to go and we're going to get this guy, and we're going to, and all that war talk that began. And I can remember telling him that, first of all, it's going to be a long time before we get really to the bottom of who's involved. And secondly, it's not going to do any good. Yeah. And obviously, in all the years that we've been caught up with this, it hasn't done any good. And there's been all different exposés on, exactly the source of it. But I think that what really speaks to me about what you're saying and what I believe is that the overwhelming feeling that came out of this, and I see this so often with the shootings, that you have some people that go, ballistic with it, but more times than not, I'll never forget the one father, and I think it was the shooting that was at the elementary school, where he immediately forgave the shooter and started talking about the importance of forgiveness and things like that. And I think that this is what it gives us an opportunity to do. What I always would say is, what were these people's beliefs that they would get into a plane and be willing to blow themselves up? I mean, that to me, what drives those people? And I'm, again, very compassionate, very empathic. So you have to look and see that there's really, and I'm a huge reader, and I always do this because then once I can't remember, but I know like The Kite Runner was a book I read that really made me see what those people go through and how they live.
They didn't feel like they were blowing themselves up. They felt like they were going to a better place. They felt energetically that they were just transmuting into a different arena because of what they were doing. And if it's true that energy does transform, then they maybe they weren't off to see all the virgins or
Right.
Whatever it was, but it was like they did transform energy at that point. And it's interesting also to look at like in their own way, what they were doing is bringing a tremendous amount of love to the planet. Now, this is what's really interesting. I've had these thoughts even when it goes to something like the religious beliefs, like surrounding Satan. But it's like, had it not been for the darkness of that or of the evil in the world, we don't see the light of the world. And so it's like it's just interesting to think about, because in that sense, like Satan himself, or Lucifer, or however you want to look at it, could be one of the brightest lights, because it forces people, when you see the evil or the dark, to see the light. I was one time at a observatory, and we were, how they do like the 3D picture of the universe, and 76% of the universe is dark. And the only way that we see the twinkling of the stars is because of that dark matter. And so that's where I think that for the focus today of what happened at that point in time, if we could all see it as the light that it actually could have been, it'll help us to transmute any of the fear or the sadness that's around it. Like for even the people that passed, and it's like you may see this now as your husband recently passed, but it's like you still can communicate with him. You still feel his presence. And so it wasn't that it was the biggest loss of the world, it's that it's the biggest evolution of communication. It's like your physical body has transformed its form of communication, where actually now it's like you can have him with you at any instant that you choose to have him with you. Whereas before you'd have to wait till you got into the room with him. You know what I mean? It's like there's always a different way to look at it so that it can remove the sadness from it and transmute it into what could it really be? The possibility. So it's basically like shattering that limitation that was there surrounding that belief, and then bringing in the reality of what it could be instead. Like looking on the other side of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So
can you hit decline on that?
Okay, we're going to decline that phone call. So anyways, one of the things too, mentioning, I do realize that these men had such a strong faith, but that was one of my points about the whole thing, to really feel that they had that much faith that they were going to a better place. Because I think so many of traditional religions, I have found, people don't adhere to the tenets of their faith to that extreme. So they totally believed that this was all for the better. So I definitely would agree with with you. But we are going to switch a little bit to something a little bit different now. I want to find out more about numerology and how you do that. I just find it very fascinating and a great way to get insights into who you are, where you are in life. So what got you interested in numerology?
I had gone through so much grief. I'd gone through, like basically the dissolution of my life is what it felt like, because it was my health, my relationship, my, like, everything. It just imploded. And I was on a trip, and this man, it was my birthday, actually, and he came up and he said, I want to give you a gift, and I want to do a reading of numerology for you. And when he was like, and then he said, I'm going to tell you something. You're not going to want to hear this probably, but he said, in your life, you're going to have relationship issues. If that doesn't wake you up, you're going to have health issues. If that doesn't wake you up, you're going to face your own mortality. And if that doesn't wake you up, you're going to die really young. And I just it took me back, because I had already had all those experiences, and I hadn't woken up to my spirituality. Because for me, spirituality was religion. And what I didn't realize at that point in time is that spirituality, like my definition of it now, is what is going on behind my eyes and in between my ears. You know, what's going on in my own world, and what is worldly is what I can look out and see. And it made me very curious about numerology. And so I actually got a numerology book, and it was The Life You Were Born to Live by Dan Millman. And I took it to work, and I had all of these employees. I had about 100 employees at the time. And I knew every one of their birthdays, because that's what part of the information that we would get, when we put them in for their payroll. And I did every single one of their numerology, so I would know them by their number, and I would watch them at work. And I was like, it was spot on. And I started seeing the guys that we had, like in quality control, really should have been people that had like the number 4, because they had detail in their number. And so I started switching people around in their positions based on their numerology. They didn't know I was looking at that, but I could see their gifts. Like I could see what their positives were. And we started focusing on their positives. So like if it was a guy that showed up late for work all the time, I knew that he had a 5 in his number, because it was freedom and discipline. So I knew that on the opposite of that, showing up late for work, he was probably the most disciplined person in the room. And so I just started honing in on what their positives could be. And as a result of that, I observed that for probably 4 years. 4 good years I watched, and I started being curious about every single person's number that I encountered. Do I have time to go into what numerology is?
Oh, sure. Go right ahead, because I'm fascinated.
Yeah, so basically it was Pythagoras, like many, many years ago, came up with this code that if there was something like the Fibonacci code that ran the universe, and it was all based on math, that there had to be a fingerprint for a human. And it was just like if a rock could be like a diamond or an emerald or a sapphire, based on its pressure or its frequency, that the human body would have a frequency based on their date of birth. And so that's how the first numerology system came about. So if you carried a certain combination of numbers, then you would carry a certain frequency. For myself, after I learned numerology, then the galactic code came into my awareness. And the galactic code is basically a code that, doesn't take into account, it takes into account astrology, because astrology is basically where the planets and the sun and everything is, surrounding us on this planet at the moment of our birth. The galactic code is based on where the sun and Sirius and the Milky Way is in comparison to the other galaxies. So it's a huge picture. And it's zooming out and looking at this very full picture that for me, when I do galactic code and numerology, I honestly wonder at times if it's really like those things, or if it's just putting my focus on those things is what opens up this conduit of information that allows the information to flow through for the person I'm doing the numerology for. But one thing I have seen, Susan, is that we all have propensity for every single thing in every single code. It's just that some of us are going to have one thing more than another, that's going to stick out, like our own uniqueness that's going to come out.
I talk about this also about astrology and numerology and things that it just gives us some guidelines, like you said, like the gentleman that was late all the time, and we look at his numbers and it makes sense why, and it gives people a little bit more insights into one another and really understanding one another. Would you say that book that you mentioned was a book that changed your life?
It definitely made a big difference in it. Yeah, it made me aware.
Yeah.
Made me aware.
And how do you practice astrology as well? Again,
I'm not. I know this much about astrology, but the coolest thing is David Palmer, my business partner in High Vibe, is an astrologer like no other. I mean, that guy is like spot on. So he can give that little piece or those little clues that help me tie the whole picture together for my own self. For him, he can see the whole picture just based on astrology.
Yeah.
He knows the other stuff too,
Yeah, right. I think I always say that too about astrology. I know just enough to be dangerous. And one of the things I want to mention is we did just have a new moon, because we talk about setting intentions with the new moon. And I think with this energy that's going on right now, again, I have always felt, and I know we've been through quite a bit of this weather problem in Florida, but I always feel that it's a time of cleansing and a time of clearing when this happens, be it water, be it fire. And I'm not minimizing what a challenge it is for the people impacted, but I feel that. And I think the fact that all of this is happening now, again, with this new moon energy, and with, I think, so many people feeling these strong shifts in where they are and where they want to be. And what you mentioned earlier, self-talk and the thoughts that you're putting out are just so important. Where the power is in the present moment and doing really your daily work in that day, because you're not promised tomorrow. And I think that was, for me, again, many of us have these defining moments where you realize, like I had started saying before, that, we always used to go to the leukemia. My husband was a huge supporter of this leukemia foundation, and we'd go to the formal event, and we'd sit there and you'd watch these people carrying the roses and presenting them for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and it's a us or them kind of thing. And to see my daughter, and at that year it was him that was the honored chairperson, to see her carrying that rose. And I think that so much pointed out to me that it can happen to anybody, that it's not a them and us type of thing. And I feel that that's the message really so much, not only being a message of love, but also a message about really realizing that at any moment, everything can change.
Yes. And that's why we create more time in a day. But what we can do is go really deep into the moments and the hours that we do have. And that's why it's so important to look in the eyes of those that you do love. Every time that you are with them, really look at them in the eye and really sink into that moment. It's so easy nowadays to get distracted, to be on our phone, to be thinking about 10 other things, but it's when we go really deep, because what we are guaranteed is this moment. And when we take a breath in this moment, everything is okay. No matter what is going on around us, because as long as we are taking a breath, it's okay in this moment. And then realizing that even if we weren't to take a breath, we switched into something else and it's still okay. And that's what allows the comfort, and the ability to soothe ourselves through anything that is going on
It's that inner peace.
Yeah.
It's that inner peace that no matter, I always visualize it, and it's funny because you're seeing it all over TV, but like being the eye of a hurricane. And no matter what's going on around you, you have just that center of stability.
Yeah.
What does your spiritual practice look like? Do you meditate? Do you do yoga? All of the above?
It's transferred. I used to do where I would sit for a lot of time and meditate. I feel like my life is a meditation now. You know, it's like even when I go to bed at night, it's like I'm sinking into a spot, you know, like into the spot in time where my body is going to work rejuvenating and transmuting. And it's like there's a lot of times where I feel like I'm awake in the night, but I don't even really think my physical body's awake because I'll hear myself snore. But I'm like, in the day, the first thing that I do in the morning is make sure that I dial right back in to the fact that I'm here and I'm grateful for the fact that I woke up. I make sure that I have a good, like 15 or 20 minutes breathing and pulling myself back into the fact that I'm in a human body. I'm on planet Earth. I'm grateful I'm here. And I observe a lot. So like when my body is like going into this space of like overthinking things, I stop and I watch the fact that I'm overthinking. And then I go into who's watching that thought. And there's something about that that just reels me right back in to that everything's okay. Because I'm just watching everything happen in my own head at that point. And it's a huge thing that I do is music, like to reel me back in. I love incense and good smells, you know, being aware.
Yeah, I remember, and I don't recall who was talking about life being a walking meditation.
Yeah.
And very much being in that space from the time that you get up in the morning and just, again, knowing what you're doing every moment. And so often I'll recommend my clients take a breath break because when I'm doing their readings, I can see they're not breathing.
Yep.
You know, you can see their shoulders up above. I mean, this is even, you know, when I'm doing it intuitively. And something as simple as that can make such a difference. Self-care is huge. I've talked about that quite a bit recently as well. So anything that brings us back, and really the beauty of knowing, and I think when you do go through watching somebody that you love cross over, you really do realize that when their body's to that point, you know, I felt like it was very important for my youngest daughter to be with my husband when he passed. And I let her do it because for me, he had left the building a while ago. So she needed to be there when he drew his last breath. And I let her, not feeling, you know, that I was missing out on anything. And I think it speaks to what you're saying. It's certainly different. I'd prefer to have his physical presence, but it's very funny because especially lately I'm, you know, been hearing him quite a bit saying things to me. And with the way he worked, I'm actually having him with me much form. But people realizing that our loved ones never leave, that they're always with us, because again, it's an expression of the heart.
It's releasing control and
Yeah.
knowing that there's a much bigger picture that we don't necessarily understand.
And I think releasing control is one of the hardest challenges of the human condition.
Yes.
I think it really is. Realizing that the only thing that we can control is the thoughts and our reactions. And I cannot believe that our hour is now come to an end. One more time, Abby, your show is on
p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays.
Okay.
I mean 1 p.m. Mountain Wednesdays.
I'm always saying that wrong as well.
It's called the Abby Moneyhun Show.
And just remember, all of our shows are available as podcasts. So the beautiful thing about this is that if there's something you heard today you want to share, tune in on demand, any subjects that we have. And it has been my pleasure. For those of you on Facebook Live, thanks so much for joining me. Each and every one of you, thank you for joining me. And Abby, a big thank you to you. It's been a fascinating hour. And until we meet again, remember, life is a journey. Enjoy the ride. See you next week.
Bye, everybody.